Once, many years ago, we had an enemy, unseen in size before. A dragon which we had previously destroyed the entire world. A slave of the old gods, completely gone mad, while still being a master tactician. A weapon of pure destruction, which only goal was the end of the world. Deathwing. How could an enemy, with such a build-up, which descent to madness was written in 3 entire books, become such a disaster? While many people think very bad of the expansion of Cataclysm, actually quite the opposite was the case for a long time. We had challenging dungeons, good raids, a very clear theme with an enemy to build up to. We had one of the best daily hubs ever. We had guild levels which were considered as one of the best guild related things ever. We had the introduction of one of the most beloved mounts ever, the Sandstone Drake. How could the final patch be such a shitshow that it ruined the entire expansion, although it was the same patch that introduced transmog to the game? Some people say that beside the raid, also 3 dungeons were added, and that the developing team had too much work. But 2 out of these 3 dungeons were really bad as well, and besides that, ICC, one of the most beloved raids ever, also came with 3 dungeons, which were great. So let's break down the 3 dungeons and the raid regarding the story, the boss fights and the aesthetics, to see what went wrong, shall we? Nosdormu, Lord of Time and Dragon aspect of the Bronze Dragonflight, wants us to go back in time to a shadowing of a world, take the Dragonsoul that got lost during the War of the Ancients and use it against Deathwing. To do that, however, we must go to a possible future of Dragonblight and destroy the dragon Muozond, which is a future version of Nosdormu that got corrupted and prevents us from doing it. For some reason. But before we can kill him, we need to kill the spirits of 2 out of these people. Bane, Jaina, Tyrande and Sylvanas. For some reason. Then we go to the War of the Ancients and together with Illidan, who we conveniently find and who apparently has no problem to work with outsiders that definitely don't belong there, we take down some demons. The same Illidan who was working as a double agent at the time, for his people and for the Legion. The same Illidan who could trust absolutely nobody at the time. But yeah, that's how it is. After that we fight the servants of Queen Ashawa, for some reason. After that we meet with Illidan, Malfurion and Tyrande to kill the commander of Ashawa's army, Varathan, and then send Manowar back to Hell, and although initially they did it without us, this time they were not able to do it alone. For some reason. Nosdormu then takes the Dragonsoul and gets back to the future to bring it to the Wormwood Temple. Oh wait, that's actually not what happens. Instead, he gives the Dragonsoul to Thrall near the Wormwood Temple and lets us and Thrall fight our way to the temple. For some reason. And the final boss is Archbishop Benedictus, the guy who was standing in Stormwind, no Horde player has ever heard of, and probably most Alliance player had no clue either who that guy was. Yeah, and he was working for Deathwing because of for some reason. However, we kill him and get to the Dragonsoul raid. And, well, we already are at the Wormwood Temple in the dungeon. But for the raid, we go out again and start on the other side of the temple to fight our way to the temple again. For some reason. We kill a big stone monster, go kill some Orgorb minions, and then go to the top of the temple, where the aspects and Thrall have gathered. They realize they can't control the Dragonsoul, so they want us to get the focusing iris in the Eye of Eternity, so they can control it, for some reason. And of course it's a trap, but we don't care, we kill some enemies and get back to the aspects, and suddenly dragons attack us, and Deathwing shows up. Oh yeah, by the way, Deathwing is flying around all the time, but instead of just killing us, he thinks it's cooler to attack the tower, which does absolutely nothing. Yeah. However, he says that his ultimate creation will attack us now, and then we kill it. Thrall shoots a laser beam with a Dragonsoul on Deathwing, but misses, because he's stupid, and Deathwing flees. But first he destroys a gunship. But not the other one, that's around as well, for some reason. So we take the other gunship, that's still around, and we follow him together with Patrick Swayze and Keanu Reeves. Nope, this is not a joke. Of course we get attacked, but we deal with these guys and get close enough so we can jump on his spine. We take off some of his backplates so Thrall can shoot another laser beam at him. He hits him and Deathwing falls into the maelstrom, which conveniently is exactly below him.
The element for his 10th 100 plus. Oh!
The aspects are talking about stuff like, wow, you did it, get some nice loot, you really deserve it. Yeah, dumbass, I freaking saved the world, what do you mean I deserve a chest of loot, what the f***? However, Deathwing isn't dead yet, and the corruption inside him has come out, you know, tentacles and fire everywhere, and we attack him together with the aspects. Oh wait, no, not really. The aspects are just flying around there and watching us. However, Thrall can finish him with a third laser beam, no problem. And yeah, that's basically the lore of the dungeons and the raids. Yeah. So let's talk about the aesthetics of the whole thing. The first dungeon starts in a future version of Dragonblight, with an impaled Deathwing on top of a Wormwest temple, which is pretty cool. But then we go to the different dragon shrines and kill the echoes of former faction leaders, which makes absolutely no sense, and the scenery can look super badass, but it doesn't matter if it's totally pointless. The thing with Zon'ozz was pretty cool, and I hope we get more of him in Dragonflight, but besides that the whole first dungeon is pretty lame. The second dungeon is the best thing that happened in this patch. Yes, the story is a bit wacky, but the dungeon itself is just awesome. No complaints here. The third dungeon is in Dragonblight again, and some old god spawns have appeared here, but besides that, nothing special. So let's talk about the raid. The road to the first boss is filled with elementals, which we have seen way too many times at this point. The first boss is a recolor of the third boss in the Stonecore dungeon. Then we jump on a dragon, which lets us fall down in an old god spawn, which is really lame. And it looked especially stupid when 25 players jumped on the same dragon, which just duplicated itself 25 times, and all of them fly the exact same route and we all fall down with a parachute. That was just weird. The second and third boss also were simple recolors of other enemies we saw many times before. The whole zone itself is something we saw plenty of. The next boss is in the Eye of Eternity, where we fought Malagos, so another reused asset. And the boss literally is an Orc Shaman in tier 2. How original. Next boss is a big Twilight Dragon, which looks basically like many other bosses we had before, but he glows a bit.
Nefarian, Onyxia, Sinestra, they were nothing. Now you face my ultimate creation.
The gunship is the same from the ICC gunship fight, so nothing new here either. The boss himself has the name Blackhorn, and to this day I have absolutely no idea if the guy is somehow related to the Blackhorn from the short quest on Mount Hyjal. You know, the guy who used us to free himself, and we have never heard of him ever since, which is really weird. Yeah. The fight on Deathwing's back is a nice idea, and the fight on Maelstrom at least could have felt somewhat like a finale, if the fight itself wasn't such a letdown. So let's talk about the fights. And I'm not including the dungeons here because, honestly, nobody cares. First of all, I won't talk about every mechanic of the fights, instead I will talk about the most memorable ones, and compare the feeling of a fight to the overall atmosphere of a raid. Because most of the bosses were pretty good and unique, but they were just not fitting too well to the entire experience. You will see what I'm talking about. The first boss, Morshock, was summoning crystals that had to be absorbed. The closer you were to them, the less damage you got, so you simply had to go to them. He occasionally teleported every player to his location and summoned obstacles on the ground. Players then had to run behind them as fast as possible so they don't get hit by the following ability. Overall, Pretty simple boss with easy but memorable mechanics, which could be fatal if you fail them. Also fitting to the raid, since many elementals were under Deathwing's sway, and this was a good opener for the raid. The only complaint I have is in the heroic version of the fight, where he summons the NPC Kokrom, who does the exact same abilities just a few seconds later, and also has the same name just backwards. And that was just weird, and I don't like it. Next, going to Warlord Zon'ozz. The only real mechanic this boss had was basically a game of tennis. He summoned a Void Orb that got kicked back when player characters hit it, and when hitting, it also deals damage to the entire raid. When the orb reached the outer wall, it was basically a wipe, because the entire raid got a lot of damage, and when it reached the boss again, he went into a different phase for a short time, where the entire raid got damage each second, so that was a healer phase. Also he got a debuff that increased the damage dealt to him by 5% for each time the orb was bounced off by a player. The fight itself had an interesting mechanic, but something just feels really weird about a big tennis game while fighting one of the warlords. It just felt goofy. The next boss is your Sergeant the Unsleeping. He summoned 3 different slimes that were walking straight to him, and when reaching him, he got a buff depending on the slime. You were able to kill only one of them, so you wanted to take out the most difficult debuff to handle. There were 6 different colored slimes that could be summoned, and most of them gave him a new ability to handle. Again, nice concept, but this just felt really colorful in a way which should have a really dark tone to it. So again, not too fitting overall. Hagawa the Stormbinder had many abilities, like Ice Tombs or other CCs, but the most memorable were the phases where the entire raid had to work together. Either you were running in circles killing 4 crystals while dodging falling ice shards, or you were building a chain electrocuting multiple conductors around the arena. A good fight again, and I actually don't have anything to complain here, but now we get to the worst bosses. Old Traxian. And I say it once again, he was supposed to be Deathwing's ultimate creation. And he basically looks like a normal big Twilight Dragon. And you might think, at least the fight would be somewhat compelling, but no. The entire raid stood at the same place over the whole fight. The tanks and heals could pick up a buff from time to time, and besides that, you sometimes had to push a bonus button, and that's basically it. This fight was such a disappointment, I don't even know what to say, so let's just see the next one. The Gunship and Warmaster Blackhorn. Basically, you had to kill 3 waves of NPCs first. Each wave had 2 big Rykul and 2 dragons. The Rykul just had to be dealt with, the dragons were not reachable until they got shot with harpoons and dragged over to the gunship. From time to time, an assassin would jump down on the ship. He was stealthed and tried to get into the ship, so you had to stop him with AoE attacks. Also the boss shot some Twilight Balls on the ship, which had to be absorbed to prevent damage on the ship. After the 3 waves, the boss came down and you simply had to kill him. He had some AoE effects where you shouldn't stand in, but that's basically it. Overall a really good fight, and thematically also very fitting, since they were trying to stop us from reaching Deathwing and we had to deal with them. I have no complaints here. So, let's get to the big guy himself, Deathwing. The fight with Deathwing was split into 2 fights, the Spine and the Madness. The Spine of Deathwing was us fighting on Deathwing's back, trying to knock down the armor plates so Thrall can shoot him. So let's see how this fight worked. First of all, if too many players stood on one side, Deathwing would do a barrel roll to throw us down. Even the Skybox was going wild doing that, which was pretty cool. In the beginning there are also 4 tentacles, and when killing them a big NPC spawned. And where a tentacle was, a hole appeared, where you could stand in without getting thrown down. Also little magma slimes appeared out of these holes. You wanted to kill 3 tentacles, then go for a barrel roll so all the NPCs fell off. Then you wanted to kill the next tentacle to get a big NPC. When pulling him through the remains of the slimes, he grew, and you wanted him to grow 9 times. When killing him now, he exploded, and doing it near to a backplate, you had the chance to kill the tendon to take off the plate. Do this 3 times and you got it. Many players didn't like the fight because it was somewhat complicated, but I think the fight itself was pretty cool. I can see why many players don't agree with me here, and that's totally fine, but this is definitely a good way to do a fight against a big dragon, because we were not able to kill Deathwing by our own. We only had to give Thrall a chance, and that's fine. Some people were mad that Thrall did the big blast and not one of us, but honestly, just imagine doing this whole fight, and after hundreds of wipes you finally did it, and then one player misses the shot on Deathwing, and you wipe anyways. I mean, that would suck, wouldn't it? So, I don't have many complaints. But I think it would be much cooler if we had to jump onto Deathwing by ourselves instead of watching a cinematic. But I think it's okay the way it is. But now we get to the madness of Deathwing. And madness it truly was. This fight is without a doubt the worst final boss fight the game has ever had. The idea is simple. Kill the 2 arms and 2 wings Deathwing uses to hold onto the platforms you're standing on, then he falls down to you and you attack his head until he dies. The dragon aspects help you with different abilities, but after killing the tentacle that's associated to the aspect, for the following tentacles you won't have this one to help you. So far so good. What was the problem now? Well, you did the same thing for about 10 minutes, which sucks, and instead of fighting a dragon you are just fighting tentacles. You are basically clipping off his fingernails. The whole fight just felt weird. Deathwing was a dragon. Man, he was the dragon. And he didn't even do a fire breath? There are so many ideas I have that would have made this fight better. Let him do a fire breath that hits 3 out of the 4 platforms, so you have to jump fast away. Let him headbutt you right after killing the big tentacle, so we die if we don't jump away fast enough. We are standing on tiny islands in the ocean. Let him create tidal waves that would knock us down off a platform if we are not careful. Let the dragon aspects do something instead of just flying around for 90% of the time. At least make them look like they are doing something. Same goes for Thrall. He's just standing on this little island doing absolutely nothing until the very end, where he steals our kill. Why? You know, if it was just any raid, I wouldn't be so mad. But this was the final raid of the expansion and it lasted for almost 10 months. Also, if you're a completionist like I am, you go there way too many times. You get a total of 4 mounts in here, as well as the legendary daggers for rogues. The only legendary I still don't have because I just don't want to go there anymore. And that comes from someone who farmed the tusks of Manowar. This raid was such a disaster that it makes a really good expansion look really bad. Deathwing and Cataclysm definitely deserve better than this. Goodbye.